The kind of cold that settles over Winnipeg in late November doesn't just chill you. It gets into your bones and stays there, no matter how many layers you pull on before leaving the house. It was a Tuesday evening, just after 5:30, when the parking lot outside the superstore on McPhillips Street was already glazed with a thin skin of ice. Most people were walking fast, heads down, shoulders hunched against the wind coming off the flat prairie. Nobody was lingering. Nobody wanted to be out there any longer than necessary. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the way they always do in large grocery stores. Bright and indifferent, lighting everything the same, the cereal boxes and the crying babies, and the exhausted cashiers all equally illuminated. The self-checkout lane near the east entrance had a short queue. 6 people, maybe 7. Most of them had baskets. A few had small carts. Everyone was tired in that particular way people get tired in November, when the days are already dark before dinner, and the cold outside makes even simple errands feel like accomplishments. Near the front of the line stood a woman named Sylvie Marchand. She was 38 years old, although most days she felt closer to 50. She was wearing a gray parka that had been her ex-husband's before he left 2 winters ago, and she hadn't replaced it because there were other things to spend money on. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail she'd done quickly that morning in the bathroom mirror, while her 6-year-old son, Ben, knocked on the door asking where his other shoe was. She never did find it. He'd worn his rain boots to school in November, and she'd been carrying that small guilt around all day. In her basket, a box of pasta, a jar of tomato sauce, a bag of frozen peas, a liter of 2% milk, and a small container of blueberries that Ben had asked for specifically, looking up at her from the grocery cart with his serious little face. The blueberries were $3.99, which was more than she wanted to spend, but she'd put them in the basket anyway. She always did. Ben was standing beside her now, gripping the side of her coat with both hands the way he did when he was tired. He didn't whine or fidget, he just held on. He'd been doing that since he was 2, anchoring himself to her in public spaces. And something about it had always made her feel simultaneously needed and heartbroken. She shifted the basket to her other arm and looked at the self-checkout screen. It was her turn. She set the basket on the counter and started scanning items one by one. Pasta sauce, peas, milk, blueberries. She went slowly because the machine had a way of not reading barcodes on the first try if you moved too fast. And when it beeped wrong it would freeze up and you'd have to wait for an attendant to come reset it. And she really truly did not want that to happen tonight. It didn't happen. Everything scanned. She tapped the screen to pay. The total came up. She stared at it for a second. $22.14. She pulled her wallet from her coat pocket and opened it. There was a debit card in there, and one credit card that she used only for emergencies, because it was almost at its limit. She had $16 in her bank account. She knew this without checking, because she checked every morning before getting out of bed. The same way some people check the weather. $16 until Friday, when her next shift pay would come in from the dental office where she worked reception 3 days a week. $22.14. She put the debit card in, typed her PIN, tapped confirm. The machine paused, that awful pause. Then the word appeared on the screen in simple block letters. Declined. Her stomach dropped. She tried again. Sometimes it was just a glitch, a connection issue, the machine being slow. She tapped her card against the reader this time instead of inserting it. Declined. The woman behind her in line shifted her weight. Sylvie heard it. That small, impatient movement. The quiet signal that someone was waiting, and she was the reason they were waiting. She felt her face go warm in a way that had nothing to do with the store's heating. Ben looked up at her. He didn't say anything. He was 6, but he understood more than 6-year-olds were supposed to understand about things like this. He'd learned it the way kids learn a lot of things. By watching his mother's face when she thought nobody was looking. Sylvie set down her wallet and pulled out her phone. Maybe the bank app would tell her something she didn't already know. Maybe there was a pending deposit she'd forgotten about. Something small. She opened it with shaking fingers. Her hands were cold from being outside. The app took a moment to load. $16.42. That was all. She stood there with her groceries, already bagged in the machine's output tray, already scanned, already hers, in every practical sense except the one that mattered. Her throat tightened. She was not the kind of person who cried in grocery stores. She had never been that person. She had driven herself to the hospital alone, the night her appendix nearly burst, because she didn't want to bother anyone. She had called her mother from the parking lot after signing the divorce papers, rather than cry in front of the lawyers. She did not cry in public. She pressed her lips together and started thinking about which item to put back. The blueberries, obviously the blueberries. And maybe the peas too. They had pasta. The sauce was enough. Ben could eat plain pasta with butter if she ran out of sauce, which she might. She reached for the bag in the tray. Hey, sorry to bother you. The voice came from the line behind her. Male soft. Not impatient. She turned. The man standing just behind her in the queue was somewhere in his early 40s. He had the kind of face that looked like it had been through some weather. Not harshly, but honestly. A few days of stubble. Dark circles under his eyes that were the permanent kind, not the Tuesday kind. He was holding a hand basket with 2 cans of soup, a loaf of bread and what looked like a children's juice box variety pack. He was wearing a Carhartt jacket with a tear near the left elbow that had been taped, very carefully, with duct tape. I don't mean to intrude, he said. His voice was low enough that the people further back in line couldn't really hear him. He'd stepped slightly closer to her so he could speak quietly. My card's faster if you want. It happens to me too, sometimes the readers are just off. Sylvie looked at him. It's not the reader, she said. She said it evenly. The way you say something when you've decided to be honest because the alternative is pretending, and you don't have the energy left to pretend. He nodded once. He didn't flinch or look away or make the face people sometimes made, that mixture of pity and discomfort that made you feel worse than the problem itself. Then let me get it, he said, simple. Not a question, not a performance. Like he was offering to hold a door. Sylvie shook her head. I can't let you do that. You're not letting me do anything. I'm just tapping my card. He looked at the screen. $22. It's nothing. It's not nothing. Not to you maybe, he said. To me it's, honestly, I'd rather just do it than stand here and watch you put things back. I've been that person putting things back. It's a terrible feeling and your kids watching. Sylvie looked down at Ben, who was still holding the side of her coat, and watching the man with the focused, unblinking attention. Children give to things they're trying to figure out. She looked back at the man. I'll pay you back, she said. You don't have to. I want to. He shrugged, the way people shrug when they mean fine, but only because you need this to be fine. He stepped up beside her and held his phone over the payment reader. It took less than 2 seconds. The screen changed. The machine beeped its cheerful completion sound. Payment, the receipt began printing. Sylvie exhaled. She hadn't realized she was holding her breath until she let it out. Thank you, she said. The 2 words felt too small for what had just happened, but they were the right ones. She said them clearly and looked at him when she said them. He nodded. Take care of yourselves. He stepped back to his place in the line. He picked up his basket. He wasn't looking at her anymore, just at his own items, because he was the kind of person who understood that people need not to be watched after something like that. He'd given her the exit she needed. Sylvie took her bags, took Ben's hand, and walked toward the door. She made it to the vestibule between the inner and outer doors before she stopped. Ben looked up at her. You okay, Mom? Yes, she said. I just need a second. She stood there in that small heated space between the warmth and the cold. The doors on both sides, and she breathed. Outside the parking lot was dark and icy, and the wind had picked up. She thought about the man and his duct-taped jacket and his 2 cans of soup. She thought about the way he'd said I've been that person putting things back, and she knew he hadn't said it to make her feel better. He'd said it because it was true. She thought about Friday when the money would come in. She thought about how she'd felt in the last 30 seconds before he'd spoken. That particular quality of shame, that isn't quite shame, but is adjacent to it. The feeling of being seen in a moment you never wanted anyone to see. And she thought about how different it could have been. The way someone else might have sighed audibly, or said something, or looked at Ben, or done nothing at all, but made her feel the full weight of the weight. And how this stranger had instead spoken quietly, and gotten the thing done and then looked away. She put her bags down for a moment and dug in her pocket. She found a pen and an old receipt from a week ago. A Tim Hortons receipt, faded, with a blank strip of white at the bottom. She wrote her name and her number on it. She wrote, "You were kind to us tonight. I meant what I said about paying you back, and even if you never let me, I want you to know it mattered." She folded it carefully. She told Ben to hold the bags and walked back through the inner door. He was still in the self-checkout line. He'd moved up 1 spot. His 2 cans of soup were on the scanner. She walked up to him and held out the receipt. He looked at it, then at her and took it. "You really didn't have to," he said. "I know." He read it right there, in the lineup, holding his soup can in one hand and the folded receipt in the other. His expression shifted in a way that was hard to name, not moved, exactly, but something softened in his face. The way faces look when someone says something they needed to hear but didn't know they needed. "My name's Sylvie," she said. "Owen," she started to say before correcting herself. "Sorry, force of habit." She'd almost used her ex-husband's name out of some nervous reflex. She shook her head. I'm sorry, I'm tired. I meant, thank you, genuinely. He smiled, not a big smile, the kind that costs something. I'm Cormac, he said. He put out his hand and she shook it. Firm, brief, the handshake of two people who were both in a hurry but who also recognized, in that moment, that some things are worth pausing for. She went back to get Ben. They walked out together into the cold, in the car, waiting for the engine to warm up. Her car took 3 full minutes before the heat actually worked. Sylvie sat with her hands in her lap, and her son buckled into the back seat. He was holding the small container of blueberries, turning it in his hands, looking at the fruit through the clear plastic. That man was nice, Ben said. He was, Sylvie agreed. Did we know him? No. Are we going to know him now? She looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. 6 years old, asking the exact right question. I think maybe, she said. We'll see. She pulled out of the parking lot and onto McPhillips, and the streetlights turned the snow on the sidewalks orange and white. She turned on the radio, and Ben started quietly singing along to something he only half knew the words to, filling in the gaps with sounds that were almost right. She did not cry. But she felt something shift in her chest. The loosening of something she'd been carrying tightly for a long time. The next morning, she woke up at 6:15 and lay in bed for a moment, before the day started. She thought about $22. She thought about how close it was. She thought about how much of her life happened in the margins of close. Close to making it, close to not, close to asking for help and not quite managing to. She made Ben's lunch. She found his rain boots by the door, and silently promised herself she'd find a way to get proper winter boots, before the real cold came in December. She dropped him at school, went to work, answered phones, filed insurance forms, smiled at patients in the way you smile when you're paid to be reassuring. At lunch she checked her phone. There was a text from a number she didn't recognize. This is Cormac, from the superstore. You left me your number so I figured I'd check you got home all right last night. Icy out there. She read it twice. She wrote back, we got home fine. Thank you again, seriously. A few minutes passed. Don't mention it. Good soup, by the way. The kids both wanted seconds. She stared at that for a moment. Kids plural. She hadn't noticed last night whether he'd mentioned kids. She'd assumed one, maybe, based on the juice boxes. She typed, how many kids do you have? 2. 7 and 4 girls. You? 1. 6. Another pause. Then, single parent? She hesitated. Then, yeah, you? Yeah. Going on 3 years now. She put her phone face down on the desk for a moment, and looked out the window at the gray November sky. Then she picked it back up. Is it always this hard? His reply came a little slower this time. The hard parts get different. They don't really get smaller. But you get better at carrying them, I think. Or you get used to the weight. I'm not sure which. She read that 3 times. She wrote, that's the most honest thing anyone said to me in a long time. He replied, it's all I've got. They met for coffee the following Saturday. At a Tim Hortons midway between their neighborhoods, because it was practical and warm. And neither of them was in a position to suggest anywhere fancier. Ben came with her. Cormac brought his daughters, Maya, who was 7, and Rosalind, who was 4, and had recently decided that she would only answer to Roz and nowhere else. The kids arranged themselves at one end of the table with Timbits and orange juice, and immediately began an elaborate negotiation about which Timbits flavors were acceptable. That required no adult participation whatsoever. Sylvie and Cormac sat across from each other with large coffees and talked. The way you talk when you don't have a lot of time. But you also don't want to waste any of it on things that don't matter. They talked about their kids. They talked about what it was like to be the only adult in the house when the furnace made a new sound, or the car needed brakes, or your kid spiked a fever at 2 in the morning. Cormac had been a carpenter until a back injury, 2 years ago, had taken him off job sites. He was doing light renovation work now when he could get it, and taking whatever additional shifts he could at a building supply store. His ex-wife had moved to Calgary with someone she'd met online. His girl spent every other weekend with her mother, his former mother-in-law, who was kind and consistent in a way he was quietly grateful for. You manage, he said. He said it without self-pity, which made it easier to hear. You manage. Sylvie agreed. Maya, at the other end of the table, was explaining to Ben the correct taxonomy of Timbits with the authority of someone who had thought about this for a long time. Ben was listening with complete seriousness. Roz had already eaten 4 and was eyeing a 5th with open ambition. She's going to eat every single one, Cormac said mildly. Ben's been saving the blueberry one since we got here, Sylvie said. He does that with anything he really likes. Saves the best for last. Cormac glanced at Ben. Something in his expression was gentle. That's a good quality, he said. Most people eat the best things first, and then wonder why the end is disappointing. Sylvie looked at him. That is a surprisingly profound thing to say about a Timbit, she said. He laughed. It was a real laugh. The kind that came from somewhere unguarded. It changed his whole face. She laughed too. At the other end of the table, Roz reached across and stole the Timbit Maya had been saving. And Maya said Roz. With such perfect older sibling outrage that even Sylvie felt it. And for a few minutes everyone was talking at once, and laughing about nothing in particular. And the November sky outside the window was still gray. But the Tim Hortons was warm and bright. And the coffee was hot, and the table was full. 3 weeks later, on a Friday when her pay had finally come in, and she'd bought Ben his winter boots. Proper ones, warm enough, on sale at Canadian Tire for $34. Sylvie transferred $22 to Cormac via e-transfer. The note she put in the memo line was, pasta, sauce, peas, milk, blueberries, thank you for all of it. His reply came a few minutes later, not through the banking app but as a text. You didn't need to do this. She wrote back, I know, I wanted to, he replied. The blueberries were worth it. She set her phone on the kitchen counter and stirred the pasta that was boiling on the stove. Ben was at the table behind her, doing a coloring page he'd brought home from school. The kind with broad simple shapes designed to be easy. He was coloring well outside the lines, the way he always did, with cheerful disregard for the intended boundaries. Mom, he said, without looking up from his coloring. Is Cormac our friend now? She thought about it for a real moment, the way the question deserved. Yeah, she said. I think he is. Ben nodded, satisfied, and selected a new color from his box. Outside, the first proper snowfall of December was starting. Soft and unhurried, settling onto the parked cars and the empty street and the small patch of front yard that Sylvie had been meaning to rake since October. It covered everything evenly. The tidy lawns and the messy ones. The places that were kept up, and the places that weren't quite managing. It made the street look like everyone was starting from the same place. It was the kind of evening that reminded you that small things add up, that a person, standing quietly in a grocery lineup, can change the temperature of an entire night. Just by choosing to be decent. That two people who are both doing their best and not quite making it, can find each other in the middle of it and make the middle of it a little more bearable. Sylvie turned the burner down and watched the snow. She thought about Cormac saying, the hard parts get different. She thought about how much she had carried alone for 2 years. Not because she had to, but because she hadn't known how else to do it. She thought about Ben in his new winter boots, already worn once, and already meaningful. She didn't know what came next. She wasn't sure where any of it was going. She had $16 in her account again. No, she corrected herself. 38 now. Because she'd been careful this week. And the furnace was making a sound she didn't fully trust, and December hadn't even really started yet. But the pasta was almost ready. Her son was at the table. The snow was falling. And somewhere on the other side of the city, she knew, a man with a duct tape jacket and 2 small daughters and a quiet way of being decent, was probably also making dinner right now. Also listening to his kids talk about something small and important. Also carrying the particular weight of doing it alone and doing it anyway. Sometimes that's enough. Not to fix anything. Not to make the hard parts smaller. Just to know that someone else is carrying it too. And that you found each other in a grocery store on a Tuesday in November. And that things like that happen. That they still happen quietly, all the time.